Interesting, and I use that word very carefully. I think it's an
Sure.
interesting move, given what Dabo Swinney said on the field immediately following the game.
Yep.
Fans are rushing the field. He said, "Make no mistake, DJ is our guy."
Our guy. Yep.
I think that's publicity stunt to some degree. I think that's hey, I don't really know who's going to be our guy. We're going to say that so that the guy that's been our guy still has confidence no matter which direction we go, because we didn't see enough of Cade Klubnik to really see. I mean, they came in, they handed the ball off to Shipley, they got the job done, but I will say this. I watched Cade Klubnik in the Texas 6A state championship game. He is playing for Todd Dodge, who's playing with his son, Riley Dodge. Austin Westlake, South Lake Carroll. If you know Texas high school football, those are huge powerhouses. Cade Klubnik against Quinn Ewers in the state championship game. Cade Klubnik, to me, was light years above Quinn Ewers in that game.
Sure.
The way he handled himself, the plays that he made with both his arm and his feet, the way he got his team to rally around him, I was incredibly impressed. And I've heard nothing but good things about what he's done in practice and in the offseason since he's been on campus at Clemson. I think they would be fine either way. It's going to come up to a decision between Dabo Swinney and that staff to say, hey, are we ready to take a calculated chance on Cade Klubnik to move forward, or do we stick with our guy that's been good, not great? He's not a Deshaun Watson. He's not a Taj Boyd, but DJ's played good football. That's a tough decision, maybe one of the toughest, in my opinion, in the country right now.
Jake, before you get in here, I have two things, and I want to get Trevor first, and then I want to get you. So I think there are two things here. One, DJ coming out of high school. He was up there with CJ Stroud and Bryce Young coming out of high school. The first year that he was there when he had to go in for Trevor Lawrence, he looked lights out. Are we worried about the weapons and it's not so much DJ? And then the other part, and this is something I want to get from you, Jake, what's the difference like for a quarterback that can move, but he has build-up speed? He doesn't have the immediate speed. We saw Deshaun Watson immediate speed, right, on zone read. Trevor Lawrence even on zone read. Obviously, you referenced Taj Boyd as well. Zone read. Cade Klubnik does more zone read. What he needs is that inverted veer, quarterback power. What does that change for you if you're a tight end, and change for you as an offensive lineman, as a blocker? So let's get into those two things, because I think that's the part of Clemson that we've got to figure out.
Yeah, I think DJ's a really good football player. I think he's a great quarterback. I think most programs in the country would be very excited to have him because he is pretty consistent. He makes really good plays and he's pretty consistent. But it's an uphill climb there. Yeah, he may not have the surrounding cast around him, but to me, he just lacks a little bit of that it factor that we saw in a Deshaun Watson, that we saw in a Taj Boyd, that we saw in a Trevor Lawrence, that have worn the same threads that he wears. I think, and again, this is a gamble. I think a calculated gamble, but I think that Cade Klubnik has that it factor that those two guys have had. But we saw Dabo Swinney make these decisions before when he put Trevor Lawrence into the game. So this is not his first rodeo, right? This is not his first rodeo at all. Him benching DJ this week and putting in Cade tells me he has a ton of confidence in his freshman quarterback, and that's why I think it's a calculated risk. And whatever direction they go, he's going to make the right decision, right? And in my personal opinion, it's Cade. Jake, thoughts there?
I think for DJ, I actually think he's been less consistent because we've seen his ceiling. You go back to the Wake Forest game. How long were we seeing the highlights of that game? Some of the throws he made, and you're like, oh man, all right, this was his breakout game. This kid's unbelievable, right? So he's got a high ceiling, but then the floor, there's a large gap there, and in any given week he can fall in between it. And it's like, man, you have to make the hard decision as Dabo, like, hey, our guy isn't meeting the ceiling. We hope on any given week he meets the ceiling. We have to make a decision to win. You'd like to see, and even in that Wake Forest game, you did see the it factor. Like some of those plays where he's wrapped up and he's got to make a throw, looking like a dangerous day. He made some big throws, but how do you do that consistently is the question. I'm kind of interested though. The politics of a position of a depth chart change.
Yeah.
You see it in the NFL because there's a heavy investment in money. Now with NIL and with the transfer portal, there's a serious political game to be played in terms of these decisions within the program. You kind of hit on this, Trevor, like the political aspect of how Dabo handled it. I mean, DJ's comments after the game, he kind of handled it well. He handled it really, really well. He's like, hey, I would have benched myself too. But like, hey, man, some donors probably, finding a way to get a company to pay your quarterback. Well, if you bench him, that donor's not going to be too happy, is he? He's going to be like, hey, man, I thought we needed to get this guy a check.
Bojangles.
It's just the truth of it. So there's a lot of politics that go into these decisions. It's a lot deeper than who is the best player on any given week. But that's also why your head coach gets paid $8, $9, $10 million at these schools. Is you have to make those decisions. You have to also deal with it when you make the wrong decision.
Well, Jake, I wanted to get it. What is it? Can you take people through the difference between a quarterback? Because to me, DJ Uiagalelei, he's a lot more JT Barrett than he is Deshaun Watson or Trevor Lawrence. And I think JT Barrett was one of the finest quarterbacks that we've seen. But can you take us through the mindset? Like you've played, you played next to the offensive line, right? You've played an inline tight end. The difference between working like a power run game versus zone run game.
So I would say this, Feld, is like, it doesn't hit you because it happens so fast in the game and it's so unexpected. It doesn't hit you. Like you kind of, at some point with one quarterback, your coordinator has an identity and he's calling plays and you start to get into a flow of it. And then you go to the backup and maybe the backup does some things differently. And then all of a sudden it's this slow process. The difference between zone scheme and gap scheme, zone scheme is more lateral.
Yes.
Right. It's more lateral. Like we have to step lateral, and then we work vertical. Right. It's a zone. We're working a zone. My zone is to the right. Everyone's stepping a zone to the right. Gap scheme is we have a gap. So a gap, it's much more aggressive. It's downhill. Yes. You just step into your gap. You can almost close your eyes and say, if any color shows in this gap, I'm hitting it and I'm clearing it out. So it's a different technique, and it depends on what your players are more comfortable with. Zone scheme might be considered a little bit more passive and a little bit more technical, where gap says, hey, gap can clean up a lot of trash. We're just going to block the gap, and then we'll have a puller come around and a fullback or somebody else to clear out outside.